open if the Spirit of God suddenly directs you one direction overnight. I remember I was speaking in Alabama one time in the States. I flew down from Canada. I got there and a pastor picked me up. I never met this pastor before, but I was going to do a leadership retreat for his church over the weekend, and then I was going to preach at his church on Sunday. So this guy's a very together person, very well manicured. He's read all the leadership books, been to all the leadership conferences. So I'm kind of wondering, well, this guy knows leadership well. Why is he bringing me down to speak into his leaders' lives? But we drive about 2 hours to a conference center where the retreat will be. And we get there, and it's really hot. It's in the summer. And he says, well, it's about 2 or 3 hours until dinner, and then you're going to be on after dinner. He said, a lot of the guys are going golfing. Do you want to go golf? And it was probably about 100 degrees at the time. I said, no. I just want to hug the air conditioning unit. And I was from Canada. I just want to just let me have coolness. And so he said, well, would you mind if I came by your room then and talked to you about something? And I'll be honest with you, I mean, I gotten up at 4 o'clock that morning, had flown all the way down from Canada, I've been driving for 2 hours. I'm thinking, this guy's had 2 hours with me in the car. If he wanted to talk, we had 2 hours to talk. Why didn't he just add? Now he waits until it's my nap time. When I want to try to get freshened up, now he wants to talk. So I admit I'm not always as godly as I should be in these times, but what I realized was it took him the first 2 hours to figure out if he could trust me or not. Now he's ready to talk. And so I said, okay, sure. So he came by. Well, he had been a pastor of a church, and it was this wonderful church. It was just doing great. They were doing all kinds of creative missions activities and so on. And but this church where he was now had contacted him and said, hey, we love what you're doing in your church. We need that to happen in our church. Would you be willing to come be our pastor? And so he felt like, well, this is an open door. It's a new opportunity. So he agreed to come. He got to this church, and then everything he tried to do, the church voted against him. And he realizes, well, I thought you wanted to change. I thought you wanted to do new things. And they said they did, but they didn't really want to. And so he is really getting upset because he had left a great church. And now he's it's like, why did you let me leave that church? Why did you stop me from leaving my great church to come to this church of stubborn, carnal, ungodly people? And he's getting more and more angry. So he had made a motion to renovate a part of the church building that was in disrepair. And one of the men who had been one of the most vocal opponents of everything he had done volunteered to actually chair the committee to repair the building. The pastor couldn't believe it. One of my opponents who never wants to change anything is actually stepping up saying, well, I'll help make this change. And so the pastor had hoped that perhaps maybe we're finally going to make some progress here, and this guy's going to come on board and see how good it is to change things. But that week he discovered that man actually was opposed to renovating that building as well, and he just figured that the best way to make sure that change never happened was to be responsible for the change. And so as chairman of the committee, he's going to make sure nothing happened. When the pastor found out, that was just the last straw for him. He called the man, he told him what he thought, and he was angry. And this is a very influential man in the church. The pastor figures he'll be fired as a result of how he talked to this man. And so as this man's telling me this, that when he met me at the airport, he's this polished, sophisticated, educated man, knows all the answers. But as I'm watching him tell this story, I just see his whole face beginning to contort, and the anger just etched all through his face. And finally, he's just gritting his teeth, just angry, even just thinking about what he'd just been through. And he looked at me and said, well, wouldn't you have been angry too if you'd been treated and lied to that way? And so in that moment, I'm looking him in the eye, and I'm not a skilled coach like Bob is. I'm just quietly praying. I'm having a conversation with God. God, I don't know what to do with this man. I don't know what to say. And we'll talk more about this, but I don't want to insult a person by just giving a flippant, shallow, Christian cliched answer to real pain this man's experiencing. Say something stupid like, well, I know how you feel. Or it's like, I've never been in your place. So I'm praying, God, I don't even know what to ask this man. So I don't know if you've ever been at that point where you're afraid to speak before you have the right words to say. I'm stalling for time. Like, God, give me something, because I don't want to insult this man by saying the wrong thing. And I just felt like God said, ask the man how he became a Christian. So I said, hey, would you mind just telling me your spiritual journey? How did you become a child of God? And he looked at me kind of funny, like he thought, I paid this like Christian leadership guy to come all the way down from Canada, and his answer is, maybe I'm not a Christian or something. Like, he's like, that's the best you can give me. I said, well, no, I believe you're a Christian. I just want to know, tell me how you got there. So he starts to tell me, and he grew up in the home of an alcoholic father. His dad was not a Christian. When he was about 18 himself, he got involved in a Christian young people's group at a church, began going, and he said, for the first time in my life, I saw people with joy. I hadn't had that. There was no joy in my home, my childhood. And he said, I was just drawn to that, the laughter, the joy. He said, one Sunday night, I'm sitting in a house filled with young people, and the host who kind of ministered to all these people, he said, I'd be remiss if I didn't just give everyone in this room an opportunity, if you've never become a Christian, to open your life up to Christ and let him just wipe you clean, just give you a fresh new start. And he said, I decided right then I wanted to do that. He said, so I prayed there where I was sitting. And he said it was as if the roof just parted from that house, and I could see heaven itself. And he said, for the first time in my life, as I was 18 years old, the first time I can tell you, I knew what joy was like. And he said, I just was so filled with joy. He said, and I just started laughing. The people couldn't figure out what was going on. I said, I thought this is what they were talking about when they talked about joy. He said, I felt so free. And as he's telling me this, he's going back. Now he's a 45-year-old seasoned pastor, and he's thinking back to when he was 18 and he met Christ for the first time. And that face that had been so angry and gritting, and the joy sort of flickers back in his life as he's going back to that time. And I remember just looking at him and saying, you know what? You need to go back to that same Jesus. Because I think you forgot how good it is to just be related to him. And he looked at me with the funniest look for a moment. And like, that's it. You could have just told me that over the phone in a minute. I had to pay to fly all the way down to Canada. And then I'll never forget, the next moment he slid to his knees. There was a little coffee table between us, and he hunched over that coffee table. And he just began to sob. It was like he just had forgotten. He'd been so busy serving God, he'd forgotten about loving God, enjoying God. And he'd become so consumed with all the problems and the opponents and the anger and the frustrations and the tasks to be done, that he forgot it was all about him. And it was about a relationship, about enjoying God. And so I did the conference and went home on Saturday, and he took me to my hotel, and he said, hey, tonight I just thought, my wife's a great cook, I thought I'd just bring you to my house and we'll just have dinner there, and be just the three of us. And so he came and got me, and he took me into, he said, hey, you go on into the house. He said, I parked my car back around the back, and you go on in. He said, my wife's there, she knows you're coming. So I walked into the house, and this woman that I hadn't really met before, the pastor's wife, she comes around and takes me by the hand, and she pulls me around the corner, and we go around the corner, and there's a big kind of walk-in pantry, and she pulls me back into the pantry. I thought, I'm about to lose my witness, or have a scandal take place or something here. Like, my goodness, what is about to happen here? And she looks at me and she says, what happened to my husband? And of course, she had been worried, just fretting. She'd watched this joyful husband of hers just being torn apart by anger and bitterness. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, he came back a different man. She said, I've got my old husband back. She said, what happened there? And I said, I just think he remembered some things he forgot. Well, and to this day, he's a joyful man. About a dozen years later, I was doing a statewide conference in his state, and I was in front of this 3,000-seat auditorium. I was going to speak that night. And that man and his wife came into the back of the auditorium. I looked back and I could see them. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. And you get the smile, you get this radiant joy 10 years, 12 years later. And I thought he'd been set free. I thought, but how did I think? Why did I mean, I just heard words come out of my mouth I never said before. And I realized that's because I was crying out to God. I'm looking at Him and talking to Him, but in my spirit I'm saying, God, help me. Give me the next words to say. I don't know what to say to this man. And you know when you've just spoken the words of God, because you see a person set free, and you realize that was from God. That wasn't me. There's nothing profound or creative or special about what I said. It was so basic, but it was exactly what he needed at that exact moment. And so that's